Right. So now we talk about the nature of God and why um, things like remote viewing, things like electronic surveillance of the mind amount to sacrilege and blasphemy. Now, if you look at it in terms of how I understand, one of the attributes of God is the one of the things that God does is the randomness in nature. Yeah, randomness in nature. Those are miraculous events. You can call them miraculous even from a scientific point of view. If you look at the probability of something happening, that's in the region of 10 to the minus 20, for example, then if that thing happened, then that would be a miracle, a miraculous occurrence. So miracles are things that we call that are random events. If you're a scientist doesn't accept anything that he hasn't seen as fact. So because you haven't seen the Almighty, you can't accept that as fact. Um, when you do see that burning bush that burns forever, then you can say that you've seen the Almighty, and you know how random events can sometimes be indicative of what the Almighty is actually doing, and it could be Him speaking to you. Also, the devil or Satan as a character in the Christian script is also someone who also does those synchronicities or those things that appear to be random, but they're not. With Satan, you can figure out that it's not random. But basically, what I'm saying is, outside in the outside world, outside of your skull, you're subject to random events. Yeah. But when you go inside someone's skull and you see into their mind, the consciousness is also subject to random events. But yet the conscious world is something that the individual thinks up. Yeah. But that is also subject to a different set of random events. Yeah. So the random events that your body experiences, those of you who try to pray will understand that if you're trying to uh, repeat like a prayer over and over again, there'll be times when you feel like sneezing, times when you feel like coughing. Those are random events of the body, but they're outside of your consciousness. But consciousness itself exhibits these type of random events. So it's as if inside your mind, yeah, uh, when you imagine the universe, as you're imagining it, something can happen to your consciousness that can actually alter what you're trying to imagine. So those are random events that are confined in your consciousness. When somebody goes into your consciousness, they then become subject to the random events in your consciousness. So you see how in your mind you're the Almighty. Yeah? So when someone goes in there, then it's like they're taking on another god. So that's why it's blasphemy. And they're also touching the things of God. Those are your consciousness is something that the Almighty is the only one who's supposed to touch, yeah? And if somebody else is touching it, then when the Almighty acts in your consciousness, when something random happens to your consciousness to cause something different to happen, the person who's into your mind, who's seeing into your mind, will also be affected by that. You are the consciousness that will be experiencing a random event. The one who's seeing inside that consciousness is as if he's outside here experiencing a random event. Yeah. So when you choose to take your consciousness into another person's consciousness, not only are you subject to the set of random events outside of your consciousness, you then become subject to the random events inside somebody else's consciousness, as well as those inside your consciousness. So you've actually taken your right to be the Almighty, and you've taken your God, yeah, and you've made him subordinate to another person's consciousness. So when someone's in my mind, the random events that take place in my consciousness dominate the random events that take place in their consciousness when they're in my mind. So I become the Lord of Lords. So, and then out here, we're all subject to the random events of the Almighty. Yeah. So, I just wanted to touch on that, just to let you know that inside people's mind, that's where they're Lord. Yeah, and you don't take yourself in there unless you want to blaspheme and commit sacrilege. yeah, and touch the things that the Almighty is the only one who's supposed to touch. So we pray, and we hope for a miracle. Meaning, you take your consciousness into a state of prayer, and as you're doing that, you look out for every random event that happens as you're praying. Some of it will just be the body, but then your consciousness sometimes does things in a random way, yeah. And anyone viewing your mind, if you put an implant in someone's mind, then these random events will be things that they can never account for, yeah. And that is you when the Almighty is you, yeah.